out of this.
Greetings, I'm Shad.
And greetings, I am Tyrant. And today, what do we have, Shad?
We have a sword to review.
What type of sword?
A very cool sword. It's already appeared in a video. I have a full video discussing the mystery of the two-handed falchion.
Oh, that's nice.
This is very nice. Now, we've had this for a while already.
Yeah, we have
and
had
so
it.
we can actually give honest and informed feedback as to this sword, what it's like to use, because we've been using it a while already.
Yes, but we haven't done anything crazy with it yet. We've done just basically light cutting. Today we're going to probably at the end put it a bit through something a little bit more rigorous.
Yeah, because if you want to know that what the whole mystery about the two-handed falchion, the historical precedent of it, terminology and stuff, you can check out the dedicated video. This video here is a specific review of this sword, which is not called a two-handed falchion.
What's it called?
The Ronin Katana Medieval Two-Handed Saber.
Well, it does look, it does sort of look like a katana, insofar as that it kind of,
Well,
at a distance, it looks like it has the same sort of similar blade geometry.
That's the brand. The brand is Ronin Katana, who makes it, which kind of makes sense because if they're making katana-like blades,
Yes.
it's not too much of a leap for them to make this because it has been compared to a katana. We do it in the other video.
We called it, I called it the European katana, and you got upset at me.
Because katanas are just Japanese falchions.
Well, we should talk a little bit about the blade geometry because it does have a sort of katana look to it.
It does. But not the same.
It's not the same. First off, this grind on this, is it convex?
Where it's a bit curved on the outside and comes in,
I'm pretty sure it's a convex, where something like a katana is more of just a straight grind.
It has a straight, very flat bevel that goes down from the fuller. This sword is wider on profile than stereotypical katanas.
You have your fuller here, but then on a katana it's called something like a bohi, and it usually extends all the way up to the end here, whereas this one, obviously, it only goes up, what, a third or 3/3 of the way up.
Yeah, and the other thing is one of the reasons why the fuller doesn't go all the way is because of how much of a more aggressive distal taper this sword has.
Yes, it does, and it's quite nice.
The weight is just gorgeous.
Now, did you want to talk a little bit about the handle? Because it has a bit of a shape that I'm not a fan of.
Let me caveat this, because this sword is between $200 to $300. You can get it on Cult of Athena. We'll have an affiliate link in the description if you're interested in this thing. It has imperfections, like you can see epoxy coming out, like this cord, it's actually stitched and is sticking out quite prominently. People might consider that ugly. It's far from perfect, right? But it is solid. So
far, because we've only done light cutting with it. And when we do these sorts of reviews, we put it through abuse to test if the fit and finishes is as good as it should be.
The thing is, though, in regards to the average quality of medieval swords, this is still better than a lot of them, like in terms of the precision of the fit and finish, how perfectly done the cord wrap is. This is still better quality than your average medieval style sword.
That is true, but it's not a medieval sword, so
it's a modern, that's right. The other thing that I really love about this sword and a lot of swords in the price range is for the bang for the buck value. The quality that you're getting for the amount that you're paying is just getting pushed further and further up. Like back in the day, crappy wall hangers cost $200 to $300, and they were dog crap. The fact that you can buy a gorgeously balanced, like very functional, high carbon steel sword for that price range is insane to me.
Something I've come to realize is usually the fit and finish on these sorts of swords we get is, mid-grade, really what you're paying for.
Yeah.
But the blades on them are quite good, so far. And I've been really surprised about that. And to be honest, as someone who makes my own stuff, obviously people aren't going to be doing that very often, I've been more forgiving on the fit and finish.
So we both love the balance of the sword, but we have different views on the size and shape of the handle.
Yes, the tapering and the roundness, I would call it.
Well, because this has pretty surprisingly aggressive taper on the handle to a very thin, rounded end.
Yeah.
I don't hate that.
I'm not a fan of it. And the reason why is because I have used swords in a multitude of different environments, usually wet hands, cold days, all that sort of stuff. And I find grips like this are they're a bit iffy. They get a bit iffy. So that is my personal experience with things like this. I don't hate this pommel and this transition here. I think
it's a nice smooth transition. Honestly.
It is. But at the same time, I would prefer something a little bit more, with a little bit more form to it. This is a bit too rounded for my taste.
I should mention, this was not sent to us for review. I bought this out of my own money because I have never seen a sword like this on the market. Like, this is a rare, interesting beast because it's actually not a medieval saber. Even though you could apply the word saber to this sword, I find that's a bit more anachronistic. And I have a bit of a hot take when it comes to the terminology of saber, because saber is a problematic term.
Oh,
Tyrant.
is it?
Yes.
Why is this?
Okay, so it originates outside of the English language on swords that in English would never really defined as sabers. And then when these swords came over to England and we started to re-hilt and put our own spin on them, saber was a term that we picked up in the English language that we applied to more stereotypical swords that had like additional guard protection, at least a knuckle bow, and curved. It was curved with additional knuckle bow. And so in English, it was applied to these swords, but then people applying it retroactively in other languages and it becomes a mess.
So you're saying you like the word falchion better, so you just describe sabers as falchions?
No, because falchion is actually a more historically valid term for single-edged swords. In English and other languages as well, by the way.
I like sabers and I like the word saber, so
in English, I think I like a more strict definition, and I'm probably going to do a more deep dive review, but here's my hot take. And I'm not saying I'm 100% yet. I want to discuss this more before I go all in. But I actually think any single-edged, including curved and not curved, okay, medieval period sword outside, that is not European. So non-European, single-edged, curved or not curved swords that fall within the medieval range should be called scimitars, because that's a broad category that defines a whole number of swords like shamshir and tolwar and stuff. And then, as soon as you go past the medieval period, when additional hand protection comes in, that's when you apply saber in English, even though saber is a term that predates the Renaissance, but when it was used in English, it was more predominantly used in that context. Do you reckon that's fair?
I'm gonna have to think about it.
You have to think about it?
I think you're right, and it deserves a dedicated video on this.
Because sword terminology is a mess. Most of these swords are just called swords, by the way, but I love more specific categories of modern day, so I know what we're talking about. And so if you're working with a single-edged European sword that falls within the medieval period, falchion, or if it's got the hilt construction of a knife, it's a messer.
Yes, for this video we'll agree on that. But back to the review, I love the blade on it. This crossguard is a bit generic for my tastes.
I also think the crossguard is, I've seen far chunkier crossguards, don't get me wrong, I think it could be thinner. It's definitely proportional for its size at the moment. I actually do tend to like crossguards a little bit longer, but that's subjective. That, like, in terms of things that I think they could improve, it could be just that little bit more refined.
Yeah.
Maybe put some, I don't know, even if they had like lines, grind lines on the ends.
Make it a little bit more visually appealing. It's very soft curves everywhere, I feel like.
It doesn't need to be this thick, and you could actually take down a good 30% of the weight on that crossguard and it'll still block all swords. You mentioned that you don't like how thin it goes here. The more I kind of just like hold this sword, maneuver it around, I actually am liking how thin this is. It feels like, because it's smaller, I can wrap more of, there's more, I don't know, more of my hand gets wrapped around it, which gives me some more feedback in its maneuverability, and it feels like I even have that little bit extra control. And it's odd, because few swords I've ever owned get so thin at that, and I kind of like it. All right,
so I think I'm inclined to agree with you. It may not be my personal favorite, but I agree. However, at sampling this exact sword we have in our hands, this is very sharp edges here. And this fit and finish down here is actually pretty bad.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because
if I move my hand just slightly,
you can feel the
it's sharp. That's the best way to describe it.
There's angles on the pommel that are sticking out further than the line of this tapered handle. And so these could be rounded off and smoothed to be much smoother. And then we also have epoxy kind of sticking out, which this actually sticks into your hand. This bit of we could cut this down, but that's a flaw in manufacturing. Actually, I can barely feel it, but it's there. You can, like it's, so that could be fixed. And I think that's everything I have. Like, the fuller line is pretty darn nice. The other thing that we should mention in terms of factory quality versus potential fixes that you need to get when it arrives, sharpness of the edge.
The edge on this was trash. There's no ifs or buts about it. It was blunt. It was just a blunt edge.
So, I mean, if you're getting functional swords, right, and you end up cutting them for any measure, you should know how to sharpen them because it's going to get blunted. If you want them to be functional, sharpening should just be something that learn how to do, and you do as a part of. And so we've been resharpening a lot of swords. There's a decent amount of people who don't know how to sharpen, they don't have the equipment to sharpen, and they rely on the factory edge. And if you're doing that, you would think this sword would be pretty garbage. And how fair is it to judge a sword's performance based on the factory edge? This is an interesting question.
Okay, so that is an interesting question because there have been times where we've gotten a sword that is razor sharp. And then we've been other times like this one where it's just
case in point, the factory edge on the Honshu single-handed broadsword was not great. That had the biggest impact on the bottle cutting in it. But then when we put our own edge on it and sharpen it up, holy crap, this thing was amazing.
I agree, however, blade profile plays a lot.
It does.
And the blade profile on this is far more effective at cutting, even if it's a little bit blunter, whereas something like this, because it has that big, thick, convex grind, if it's blunt, you're not getting through anything, period. It's just terrible.
I have a couple, 3 English two-handed swords. They're called the English two-handed swords. I think they're are they windless? No, not windless. I forget who makes them, but I have not reviewed any of those swords yet. One of the reasons is the factory edge is so insanely dog crap. Like, it would almost give a false impression of the quality of the swords because it won't chop through anything.
Right.
But that is one of the big, I know if I review it, even if I put my own edge on it, I would mention how dog crap the factory edge. Yeah. But to give an honest, I guess, presentation of the potential of the sword,
you have to sharpen it.
You almost have to see what it can do with a proper edge on it.
So for this one here, we have put a pretty reasonable edge on it. We were using this the other day to cut, and it was cutting quite nice. So did you want to get into some cut tests, or did you want to talk about the sheath first?
We should talk about the sheath. This sword came with a sheath. It actually had 2 connector points that are detachable, and if the other one was on, it was hanging too horizontally.
Oh, yeah, it was not very good.
It's just on this. But this could actually be detached. Now, I'm a bit of 2 minds about this.
Yes, you are.
Because, well, first, Tyrant isn't a fan of this.
It's not that I'm not a fan. All right, so when it comes to a single-edged sword with a curve, something like this, it means it can only go into a sheath one way. That's what that means. And with a leather sheath like this, it's very floppy. And usually when you're trying to sheath a sword like this, usually it's not it's not that big of a deal. However, because we don't usually have a sword on our belt a lot of the time, it's very easy to just put it in the wrong way.
Put it the wrong way.
And I've found that not just me, like a couple of people have been doing this, because the sheath, you can't actually see this bit with your eye. It's floppy out of the way, whereas something where we have a wooden sheath, it's far more, you're not going to make mistakes with that.
There are a number of additional problems that we will mention with this, but before we do, I guess my acknowledge, this is the thing of 2 minds about it, is that there's a lot of swords that you buy that don't come with sheaths at all.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that at least you get something. I mean, I bought the Cold Steel Kriegsmesser.
Yep,
Nothing, no sheath, and it'll be really useful to have even a bad, crappy protective covering on it. Because that's kind of what we have here. This is not great. Like, look how loose it is up here. It's not a tight fit by any means, and it kind of feels like it was made to have more, like the Kriegsmesser fits in this.
Yes.
And so, is it generic? They just slapped it with the sword. At least they give you something, you know?
So, to be clear, the quality of this sheath isn't very good, but it is better than nothing, and it does protect your blade for the most part. I really wouldn't like it for wearing, for actual use, but apart from that, it's better than nothing.
Now, just because I'm a pendant, I love details and stuff like that. The reason why I'm calling it a sheath is it's leather. Usually sheaths are leather, wood coverings, the scabbards. I know in normal language they've kind of become synonymous and doesn't matter. And so, look, like if someone calls this a scabbard, it doesn't really matter. Actually, you should call it a sheath. But I know technically that's the distinction.
It doesn't matter.
I know in language it doesn't matter. I like to know the difference, and then I've eased up on the whole pendant thing when it comes to language terminology specifically, unless you're spreading misinformation by the terms.
But do you want to get into some cutting? What do you want to start with? Pool noodles or
first? I want to start with maneuverability and usability.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a flourish.
Swing it around. I'll grab this.
So right off the bat, the maneuverability, just the weight distribution, feels gorgeous on this thing. So we're looking at a distal taper of right here. That's like only 2.5 inches down the blade. It's got a great distal, sorry, that was the point of balance. Did I say distal taper? Anyway, that's the point of balance. It's got a gorgeous distal taper, which makes it just super maneuverable, feels light as anything. One of the biggest compliments you can give this sword is definitely its balance, its overall weight distribution, and that's a combination of the profile of the blade, the weight of the pommel and crossguard, everything in combination makes it really good. Now, when it comes to swords that have blades that are off-center, right, it has the same thing as a katana. You can definitely flourish it, right, but it doesn't spin nearly as easily like this. Doesn't really mean too much. I just like to do a flourish test on the swords, but that's my views on how it feels.
So as you guys know, I genuinely prefer to use one hand. I know some people, this is a two-handed sword, I get that, but to use it with one hand, it is completely maneuverable. It's light enough, and this weight distribution is something I would say more akin to a katana rather than something like a longsword, which I personally like, which is why it's so enjoyable. But I think that this is a well-balanced sword for my taste. It's light enough to be used one hand effectively, also two hand, and I will agree with Shad that I might be coming around a little bit to this little taper down here, but for the most part, I'm really digging it.
Now I guess it's time to chop stuff with it.
Actually use it.
We've already done it, but let's do some more. Quick caveat on the price, the $200 to $300 was in the US, okay? After currency conversion and shipping, this was closer to $400 to $500 Australian getting this to me. So just wanted to mention that. All right, let's So with these next cuts, I want to focus on ease of cutting. I'm going to be putting far, far less power into this, all right? I want to see how well will this sword do. And this is a little unfair because I haven't really done this a lot with the other sword reviews. And so there's a good chance I'm not going to, pool noodles can be surprisingly unforgiving, okay? And so there's a good chance I will not get through, but this is going to be basically, I want the sword to do most of the work. It's just going to be, I'll let it drop and see how well it does like that, okay? Interesting. So, I mean, it performed adequately, but I did find more difficulty with the water bottles.
So we've done a lot of reviews and we've done a lot of cuts with a lot of different swords, with a lot of different geometry. This one has been a bit of a mixed bag. I've found it to be a little bit more of a wild card than other swords. If it's a European sword, I think we can get consistently good cuts, so long as the edge is good. Katanas, let's be honest here, they usually perform pretty good.
If they're sharp, but if they're blunt, they just much problems.
This is true.
It's weird though. Katanas come sharper than nearly any other sword I bought. It's like the manufacturers put more effort into making them sharper on arrival than other swords. Why?
I would probably say edge geometry.
I don't think, well look, Katana has gorgeous edge geometry.
Yeah.
That's one of the big virtues of the sword. You've noticed it too, they come sharper.
I've noticed this when it comes to European swords manufacturers, for some reason, don't like to put good edges on them.
Yeah.
But in terms of this one, I found it to be a little bit of a wild card. And that's not because it wasn't sharp. There was good, clean cuts. We got clean cuts in there.
Pool noodles, I was zipping through, even on cuts that no strength, barely any strength, I'm just like, let the sword do the work. And I think that's a good sign of a sword that can perform when you do those types of cuts.
But now we're on to our final test for our review. And this is the one Shad is a little bit apprehensive of because he spent his own money on this one.
I bought this. This is my, this is one of the advantages when people send us swords for review. They're not like, I didn't pay for it, let's ruin the thing. And we've destroyed swords on this channel as a result. And so it's not like they're paying us off to give it. No, when they do, I'm usually more aggressive with it. I want to keep this sword. I bought this because I like it.
So let's try and break it.
No, we're not we're gonna put it through a level of stress that swords should not be put through.
Let's try and break it.
But not to distract. We're not gonna, no. So first thing that I quickly want to check is the spring temper on this thing. Ooh, okay. I love spring steel. By the way, we have a video dedicated on the historical validity of spring steel in medieval swords, showing categorical proof for people trying to say, not all they shouldn't. Watch the video. Okay, abusive testing. Ooh, let's do it. This is why abusive testing is really important. Not necessarily just to see how well the blade holds up, but the feedback you get when shock is put on the sword, it hits your hands, okay? And so that lets you know how well the handle construction basically is in terms of how comfortable it is to use. And I mentioned that there was a bit of epoxy that's sticking out right here that I thought you couldn't really feel when you're holding it. Well, when you hit things hard with it, you really feel it. That thing was stabbing me in my hand in an uncomfortable way. And I was rubbing right there.
So I was right.
Didn't like it.
All right, so first off, I'm gonna start with one hand and then I'm gonna move up to two just to gradually increase the power. Not by much, because Shad's staring a hole at me, so I better not break it. So we got to editing and I realized that we were hitting the wood a little bit too soft. So I wanted to do it again and hit it harder. I'm not gonna try and break it. I'm still not gonna try and break it, but it needs to be, it needs to actually put up some abuse here. So that's what we're gonna do. Now that was much more of a harder strike and it even shows with the depth there. Blade still held up perfectly fine, no bends, no sets, no nothing. But I felt that time was a lot more, actually showed that we can put this thing through some abuse. So in terms of the blade, it's held up, hasn't taken any sets. The fit and finish is still all right, except we've got a tiny little bit of a rattle in the cross guard now.
Not too much, like it was a slightest bit loose going into this, but it's gotten a little bit more, not much though. And by the way, this is not only well within the durability of historical swords, it is more like it was common for medieval swords to get loose and then they'll put shims or something
in there. You can also fix it by wrapping string underneath the actual grip here and that will tighten it back up again. So it's easy to fix, and the most important takeaway for me is it's still well within operational use for safety purposes. Because there's been some other swords we've tested here which
we don't want to use anymore,
We're not using them anymore because they are dangerous at this point.
There's enough damage for us to be worried that there'll be a catastrophic failure at some point. Where this, not even close to that, it's
still good.
Solid as anything. There was some interesting feedback in its performance against wood specifically.
Because of the edge geometry on this, it has, like we mentioned before, it has a bit of a convex grind to it.
Yeah, kind of like toes.
Yeah, a bit like an axe grind, I would say. So actually, when I was hitting into the wood, it felt very nice and very solid. Whereas other blade geometries, I've been a bit more, for example, the bastard sword. You love the bastard sword.
I do.
It cuts wood fine. I'm not disputing this, but the feedback you get from it is terrible.
Yeah, there's a lot more vibration in the handle when you do that, where this felt solid and holding its own, and it dug into the wood really nicely. And what's interesting about this is that blade profile and geometry, of course, gives you different results on different mediums.
Yeah.
And so if we were to just say leave this on the water bottles, it didn't cut great on water bottles for me. It was more exploding the water bottles. I got more exploded water bottles than I usually do. There were still heaps of clean cuts, of course.
But I was able to get clean cuts, and on those clean cuts it felt good, but I was finding it far more difficult than I usually would on a sword. And I'm not sure what that comes down to. I think it might be the blade geometry. It's a beautiful blade geometry. I love it.
Well,
but in cuts, I've found it a bit of a mixed bag.
Against water bottles, yet against wood, it was even better.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of depends, this sword would go up against, if in a historical context, cloth, flesh, bone. This could be pretty good at getting through that bone.
Now, as I think we mentioned at the start, the most important part for someone like me when we get one of these swords is it's not really about the handle, it's not really about this fit and finish, it's more about the blade. How good's the blade you got on this thing?
The blade is the most important part.
Yes.
Because the handle is... Yeah,
but they're very mixed bag when it comes to quality.
And that's the thing. The handle is adequate. There's nothing really that blows you away. And there's more problems with the handle, especially with the sharpness, the epoxy, the poor fit and finish. Yeah. And so it's adequate with some severe defects. And so that makes it below... But it's solid though. And I like that it's solid. It
only took me 2 hits to get this crossguard a little rattly. And they were light hits because I didn't want to destroy your sword. So, But I also like how thin it is and the feel. And that's fine. I think balancing up the negatives and positives, it is more average. It's in the mid, thing. But the blade, okay? The blade, the main part, I would say, of the sword, has held up quite nice. I really liked it. I feel like if we put an even more keen edge on it, maybe a lot of the issues we had with it would clear up. And that's something I'm willing to try because I really like this.
That's one of the things that's always hard to take into account in cut tests. This is sharp, right? If I slice this on my skin,
it'll cut your flesh,
But it is not razor blade. It doesn't shave. It's not shaving sharp. It's more like wood chisel sharp. Actually, a bit more than wood chisel sharp.
But even then, when you get a sword, for example, a sword specifically, to razor sharp, once you cut a few things, it's no longer razor sharp.
But the thing is, though, the performance of razor super sharp swords in those first few cuts are insane.
Yeah, but it's only a couple of cuts, and it takes so long to get to razor sharp. But is that everything?
That is everything. If I was to give it a rating out of 10, I'm sitting on, I think, a 7 out of 10.
I would probably give it a 6.
Yeah, and that's fair. I'm trying to 6 or 7.
For the price range, it's that's important.
Price range, for the quality you get for the price, this is amazing. It is an affordable sword. And then the fact that this is like the only sword of its type on the market that I have seen. You see Kriegsmessers, but actual two-handed falchions, which were more rare historically, but we have historical art. Check out the video.
Well, I'll put it this way. If you love katanas, like myself, but you understand that there are drawbacks to a katana. This sword is actually really, really good for that. You've got spring steel, you've got beautiful blade, and then on top of that, you've got a nice crossguard, a useful, practical crossguard. And the handle, while it's not my favorite,
but I like you grip it, and I love pummels. Grasping this nice round knob right at the end, gives you a lot of control over the tip.
I would say it's a solid choice.
Solid choice. I'm impressed Ronin Katana has made this sword. I want to see more sword manufacturers make swords like this because they're rare. They're not rare. They're hard to find.
Yeah.
And making one in such an affordable range that's so functional makes me happy.
Yeah.
Makes me happy.
But if you like this video, we've got more sword reviews.
Or do you want to know the historical context of the falchion?
Oh yeah, you did that video, didn't you?
Like where does it come from? Why is it called a falchion? I don't think it should be called a saber.
I know, we've been through this.
The video, right here, you can check it out.
Click it. Yeah, I wanted to go do some more cutting.
Okay.
All right. I'll leave you